It's recording, Steven. You're good.
Oh, okay. The one I see. Plan. The United States federal government should enact substantial criminal justice reform in the area of sentencing by abolishing capital punishment policy that violates human dignity. The federal government is resuming capital punishment can be applied to a prisoner in any state. Article 19. The DOJ has directed the federal government to resume capital punishment. State opposition not impede the federal government from allowing the penalty of prisoner from the state. Federal death penalty applies to all foods. State probably the federal death penalty include over federalization of state crimes. Federal death penalty can be triggered by 60 different offenses, and the DOJ is intervening to take over state cases. Federal cases receive weaker review and disproportionately target black people. See Part 19. The first 5 minutes captured today were carefully chosen. The was heard. The first one today was what's supposed to execute black person after black person, then federal penalty because you find trouble in the particular strength science because the federal penalty is plagued by problems that have caused people to move away from the death penalty and to say the death penalty conviction or subject layers of federal conviction only that in many cases receive little meaningful scrutiny and effect of the bill was in the to take over to the sale of the circuit 13 the penalty defense have received the time to have been people of color disproportionate number of sentences located in districts where the jury polls predominantly white Trump administration seeing death sentences and states will follow to the penalty independently. Some states will use the death penalty unless they are forced to stop by the federal government. NYT 17 leaving it up to individual state and not those who say they pass law to the capital process that have guilt are repeatedly committed to stop killing those that are forced to relying on extradition absolve the courts of responsibility. The 8th Amendment, the death penalty is unethical. First, it is racist, state-sanctioned murder. The arguments in support all suffer from fundamental false. Court 16, African American country 31% of those sentences bring evidence that others have not committed murder. Based on the terms for the south of the most death penalty, execution, and killing murder, the killing is rather hypocritical. If ill, as no slavery, the law of the procedural safeguard by 156 and more sentences. That's why it's more 90% of the death row population, since the public is not permitted or murder to should the government. Second, capital charges, death sentences, and executions are all inherently torturous. The prohibition against torture should be absolute in no circumstances can be used to justify a best or 19. Capital charges inflict severe trauma and torture, state-sanctioned killing is constituted an effort to human dignity and the right to freedom from cruelty, credible threats of death, murder, nature, and international legislation to be used to divide torture. The state crosses the line when it veers into torturous conduct that serves offenders of their humanity. Death sentence should be declared unlawful. The use of capital punishment morally reprehensible. Third, it dehumanizes and is fundamentally incompatible with the genuine respect for human dignity. Also, 19. Death threats are inconsistent with human dignity. Even heinous offenders have a right to be free from torture and cruel treatment of the hallmark as well as that they would punish both without practicing it. Wrongful conviction and executing innocent people and is a statistical certainty absent the affidavits. 19. Execution of brutal and just for criminal justice doesn't like with human life and the like we're no longer safe human wrongful the government is going to 160 death row and it's all this could have been wrongfully killed, wrongful conviction, happy to die when it's innocent notification of exact false conviction, misconduct, false needs, or at least wrongful in prison person has the potential to be separate. The right to human life is enough to repeal the death penalty law. The government to decide when a person's life is tyrannical or one and a person's life is not worth the retribution. The death penalty is a morally wrong collective behavior that makes us all accessories to murder and enter cycles of violence. Word in 19. If those who are put to death agreed the capital punishment was correct, it would still be morally wrong behavior and responsibility toward our fellow being capital punishment wrong collective behavior and make society get sexual or like enter cycles of violence, prioritize ethics, institutional violence, and moral disengagement. At the heart of the death penalty is the same that facilitates genocide and cleansing the world of those deemed unsafe. Johnson 18. Dehumanization emerges at the culmination of authority condemning person or render dehumanized entities to be stored in the dispatch psychological mechanism lead to shutdown and methods the objectification that enables generate dehumanizing creative mode of violent capital punishment kill the other offender Christ once that while doing execution once again in the chamber of justification and capital punishment none is providing the Constitution or reform can change the confining and killing process. The penalty of death will be waiting or intolerable. Our respect for human dignity is necessary to sustain the essential meaning of being human. Without it, tyranny, war, and ecological collapse are inevitable. Way 19. When we abandon effort to hold the human dignity, we abandon the moral principle of follow the corruption and tyranny, and those human enduring hearts and moral failures of the company of influence, ecological balances, ever more fragile regional instability, democratic governances, and economic abuses are committed against, and the dignity of humanity is compromised. Framing the death penalty as a violation of human dignity provides the tools to challenge and focus on retribution that sustains other harsh punishments, and it allows us to fall in sync with the global anti-death penalty movement cleansed over at all 16. Abolition is agent for everything to focus on human rights, although they will often more than human punish only adopting human rights framework was the often the human being the rest of the anti-death penalty movement has been a successful adopting framework power the avalanche in a way that opens the door of access of punitive detention. The U.S. is responsible for global death penalty practices, helps sustain it in Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia, and it undermines international human rights law reversal by the court and necessary to invigorate global abolition. Counterplan 16. The UN call for moratorium on the death penalty. The U.S. casting the voting countries may employ the death penalty and says they are fighting international. They are the only way to capitalism. The U.S. ignores the reality of its refusal to abide by international human rights commitments. The U.S. first clearly, the U.S. clearly leads global death penalty practice. The use of death penalty by the U.S. is used to justify practice when the Supreme Court ruled is unconstitutional. Mark the beginning of the decline of death sentences around the world. Abolishing the death penalty would allow us to join and help lead a worldwide conversation about fair criminal justice. Garrett 17. The triumph of mercy is a global phenomenon. Majority of countries have abolished the death penalty. The countries that double down on execution of authoritarian regime joining the nation that have abolished the death penalty could help us be a part of the worldwide conversation. The court should unequivocally repudiate the death penalty case by case judgments and deference to the states inevitably fails. Only abolishing can overcome inherent problems in the process. Period 11. Abandoning judicial resentment to open the Pandora box, permit the capital to throw an unusual punishment violation of the amendment to the Constitution that's interpreted from the constitutional rights from the court to intervene to protected rights that are an application of indoors. Why the court must continually intervene to address the result of the jurors to close the box travel and definitely remove the box and prohibit the state close the box and possible the consequence of the case by case approaches innocent individual may investigate capital rights and be full of error when the box of the capable inevitable conclusion. Capital punishment should be removed from the state. The cost of allowing capital punishment outweigh any benefit that capital punishment should be abolished. Only abolishing the death penalty and remedy the state's racist murder of innocent people. Westler 16. The death penalty legitimacy has been corrected arbitrarily discriminatory direction. The death penalty should be found torturous to violate constitutional law. Capital punishment only but reserved primarily for the convicted killing white people. Black men who kill white women no longer receive the law's harshest treatment. Death sentences or higher case against men of color that just itself short of placing the practice in the historical state for the context and just influence to raising capital punishment continue to uncheck the death penalty information and recited that after study from the killers or more likely to be sentenced to death and killers of black their government should not involve the political punishment that is embodied the discrimination, equity, hatred, and arbitrary necessity. While that sentence found extremely higher rates, 2/3 of the capital punishment overturned people demonstrated near certainty that innocent Americans have been and will continue to be executed. If the court would denounce the death penalty as a violation of the amendment, the American legal system could have to the barbaric practice rooted in slavery. Framing utilitarianism is susceptible to bad faith tinkering with numbers justifies atrocity. Whole 95. Pulling the numbers as estimate the number of lives saved by the amount of life lost. Some action can never be justified. That are consequent Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the dream of utilitarian thinking. It is a moral self our condition that person also would be treated in the numbers and easy to link our religion and susceptible to bad faith reasoning here with the numbers nothing. Virtually an atrocity can be excused. All recent extinction events together 0.2% per year. Simpson 16 of Asian reformation, 5 global catastrophe 0.2% per year. Part is probability custard also 8. It is going to calculate to believe that high degree probability to control individual loss and infinity calculations and overestimating draw factor approach and infinity risk management very non-security policy represent logic. A catastrophe decision makers and firm responsibility, even the most source and loss of the contribution potentialities and probable defense are linked to prevent the possibility, although likely to make the least impression possibility absence of violence is not evidence of absence. Be aware of selection bias and the conjunctive fallacy. Each internal link is a misleading snapshot of person. If you reduce the probability of the next one out of 98. Conflict scenarios gain more credibility than the difficulty calls of the difficulty scenarios comprise a number of links which may seem impossible given the before likely don't display each element of the branch of the detailed neutral outcomes snapshots of a highly selective view for the future. The fact that only negative outcomes are articulated to destroy their uncertainty, flutter, nor concern with dangers that must not zero probable length threshold of the establishment possible defense. Each life in proof could solve an existential catastrophe because Merrick 17. There's something called the universe and human eking of all universe and the universe implication resemblance to the Republican conclusion and to learning extinction we could reduce to respect indirect means and improve the worse off. This would curve ripple effects reaching wider sometimes the doctor occurs as we had advantage of differences were no pretend testing government tonight for resources the child will be inspired to develop a drug network might cause the economy to develop or make innovation arrive quickly. Wars unlike this by Cotton Pan Weasel 19. We changed cost of measuring size and per capita targets in 1950 breakdown, including the interstate wars such as more population level central evidence. Yes, no changes are growing the break is at 1950 due to sample size, including interstate wars, decreased wars, making it harder to direct no change. Our analysis suggests a future war lower. There's evidence the world has become peaceful since the 50s.
You good?
I am good.
Okay. Who does the plan?
The federal government, USFG.
So your piece of Barry evidence says the court is key. If we win that you are not the court, then how do you solve?
The Barry evidence says that the court could be helpful. Again, the plan text says like the USFG. I don't know what this business about winning we're not the courts is.
Well, it says the Constitution relies on the court to intervene to protect these rights. And also, how does anyone besides the court create a law with this dignity frame? Does Congress sign a bill that says like, oh, we should just care about dignity?
I can tell you that the plan has the United States federal government enact substantial criminal justice reform in the area of sentencing.
Yeah, got it, for sure, no doubt. So this like dignity thing in the plan text, who determines what violates human dignity or what human dignity is?
I think it's a legal term, but I'm honestly like not entirely familiar. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, Nina.
I don't think it's any one particular person who determines it. It's not like, it is both something that would be included, you're right, either in a court decision or in a bill or whatever we decide that the agent is, and also something that we have forefronted in this debate as a frame.
Your plan text says that you get rid of capital punishment and then also all policies that violate human dignity. Isn't that sort of a subjective judgment for either like the justices, the people in the Senate, or Trump, who's the one who has to sign it to figure out what violates human dignity?
Is it subjective? Like, I think definitionally, yes.
Well, then, yeah, but then, like, how do you assure that things like life without parole are abolished? Because maybe the justices don't think that violates human dignity.
Well, I don't think we need to win that we like abolish life without parole to when we like solve the AF. We definitely get rid of capital punishment, and this is the death penalty AF. Like all of our arguments are death penalty bad.
Well, but so many of your arguments are based upon this human dignity frame that you have forwarded to justify getting rid of said death penalty. It seems like that's not compatible with allowing life without parole to continue to exist.
I don't know. We read like 6 cards in the policy that are all just like death penalty specifically bad. If we get rid of that, we definitely solve those.
Like, our argument will always be that we do not fix everything that is wrong with the criminal justice system. We take
Yeah.
away the ability for the state to murder
So,
people.
what does it mean to prioritize probability?
Well, there are certain risks that are happening now that we know are definitely happening. For example, the government definitely kills people right now using
Well, yeah,
capital.
but what does it mean to prioritize probability?
So you should prioritize that because it has 100% probability.
Give me a definition without using the words that you're trying to define.
Right now, the government is killing people. That should stop, and you should prioritize that.
Okay, the 1 in C's been sent. It's 7 off, advantage framing. Is anyone not ready? No? Okay, great. First off is the critique the F as a form of feel-good politics where politicians walk away while defendants are committed to die behind bars of plans like a revolutionary abolitionism implies hope in the criminal system to provide a moral alternative for death row inmates, capers, and 12 community sensitive death row inmates, especially untroubled inmates would be reviewed to the pine torch petition to receive a new trial to dismantle capital punishment and challenge by the mind encourages us as if there were no further questions with a death eligible defendant and LW hears something about we go home and just not go home. This rhetorical mood perpetuates the racial and white supremacist state violence and violence productive of American globality. Rodriguez and 7 U.S. prison regime is a condensation of racial white supremacist state violence and degree prisons of domination of the cruise central facet dominations capital uses state institution at human acknowledged disruption formed through regimes and genocidal violence war making racist white supremacist state violence and mass imprisonment prison regime is undisputed productive of American globality. The alternative is radical disidentification with the state of affirmative politics in favor of abolitionism. Only separating our efforts from reformist casualty management can challenge the genocidal war in black, brown, and indigenous bodies. Rodriguez and abolish practices are just supremacy against given racist type of state violence transforming institutional premises favor short winnable policy reforms or carcelate activists member to the state to be confronted by abolitionist policies tell stories about itself facilitated by the media progressivists relied on reproducing racism and winnable victories need for political corruption of technology to fix and negotiation longer to be identification with the state redeemed society produced through terror inspiring structure dominance requires radical vision. Next is the state's counterplan. The 50 states and all relevant territories should enact substantial criminal justice reform in the era of sentencing by abolishing capital punishment and policies that violate human dignity. States can abolish the death penalty in courts when model it subs in 19 you announced moratorium and execution. States for abolition playing on state houses happening at the same time where Ohio, Pennsylvania moving with the moratorium designing and being up on the Supreme Court evolving standard decency is looking what's happening in the state time Supreme Court is seeking going to take these cases. Next is the Japan dissent. Abe is hanging on as the head of the LDP. The alternative is unstable actions. Saguchi 626 Abe remains in favor of the LDP to lead the party into election held with the APT victory in the past national election that electoral and show world Abe's ability to influence be a successful portion benefit. Dark horses that she was seen to support wise politicians arguing for position nuclear post-form Suga is another post-Abe possibility from installation to be difficult to see who will emerge the strongest. The plan puts pressure on Japan to abolish the death penalty. Johnson 20 Japan falls America's lead Japan return to capital punishment and America's return to super party self-archival type of liberal democracy. Other provides coverage to abolish capital punishment. Every legally responsible to American abolition for Japan to do its done in modern history after changing circumstances of external environment. Abolish capital punishment. Leaders receive little pressure from domestic constituencies and public support for capital punishment is high. Abolition would cause backlash to party leadership. Johnson 20 in Japan capital punishment is a way to gain both in office and tool electoral gain ability to make a some jurists believe our significant opponents would be wise to recognize this abolition positive in the face of public support for capital punishment. In China, Japan-China relations are stable under Abe. The plan undermines security initiatives by replacing him. Strassi in 20 Japan, the former U.S. China rival Japan to support and export of Abe has been engaged in bringing Japan relations to Japan came to power. Abe now Japan will join China fund the BR. Japan continue to head China's attempt to challenge regional order while challenging engaging China in rule building and weak Sino-Japan relations cause conflict draws in U.S. party in 17 Japan relations via interior in 2012 China's export of pessimistic and Senkaku Islands concern alliance could draw the U.S. in a conflict with China and the ECS Japan relations is likely the two can address climate change connectivity and economic integration. Next is the court's counterplan. The United States federal judiciary should adopt substantial criminal justice reform in the era of sentencing by abolishing capital punishment and policies that violate human dignity. The solvency advocate is 1AC barrier that was cross-text. It's explicit about court action in Congress isn't key. It competes repeats it picks out of USFG and enact both of those prove that AF cannot be the court minority in 20 usage of the Tournament Act include the actions of the court of limited executive agency powered by the legislative adopt rules and act and adopt to accommodate different things. Next is the NDAA politics. They said NDAA will pass now. It includes COVID response. Emmer 7-9 prepared defense for easy goals, bill, house bills, and houses, and resolved at least for now ability efforts to accomplish their process houses that are working on their version section 806 have the duty review analysis materials or sourcing industrial capacity, examining procurement process analysis will be looking at the lack of goods and quantities and quality were acquired from the U.S. source critical pharmaceuticals, med devices, and PPE. New CJR measures get bogged down in partisanship and inertia. Binder 6-8 Floyd renewed demand for Congress to address racial injustice, performance capitalists that tougher differences between partisan representation, elections, and areas various even symbolic measures face heavy slog Trump. We can Republicans oppose Democratic measures like bills that on arrival restrict various and make less likely issues addressing racial inequalities will make on the Senate's agenda. That eats up valuable floor time that's needed for the NDAA 4 and 616. Republicans signal the chamber way to take up policing legislation for criticism. Later suggested there's little time for giving it a fiscal allowed to eat up precious floor time. An effective federal response levels a devastating second wave. There's a small window to act. McIntyre 6-2 governor received particularly how the federal government plans to help provide testing. Continue testing people to contradictory critical threats. Second wave will be very small regarding supply testing PPE to prepare for the second wave. And the second wave will kill millions and mutations cause extinction. Does done. And five COVID-19 is Rebuttal and measure possibilities leading extinction to people. The virus will be dead or likely to go through mutations to increase rapidly, targeting a broader age group and survive when summer arrives. COVID and cousins will claim life, not just some, but humanity as a whole. Next is the elections. It said Trump is losing swing states by a growing margin, but departure from his current stance saves the elections. Or 6-12 polls indicate trailing Biden by a growing margin. Loyalists and debated from Hammer support for the elderly, educated suburban voters, religious voters, even accept the public that wants empathy and reconciliation. That discrimination will be priority in November. Trump can find his spending perhaps durable may have been more convince Americans that he can do more. And new efforts to address racism and criminal justice move voters towards Trump by giving him an accomplishment specifically true in swing states. Small inroads are key. Lawrence 19 polls have registered favorability for Trump among black voters. They give right margin difference in swing states. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Montana, Republicans. That mentioned until Trump CDR received publicity modest swing of African Americans toward prove decisive party spending on job positive message black voters. Trump lies to announce additional initiatives. And Trump re-election leads to great power, nuclear war, right? In 20 Trump question alliances and military presence. Democrats committed role in Europe and Asia. Trump can will ruin a policy. If Trump wins the election, quickly would feel empowered. Washington would adjust. Trump could pull out of NATO to return from wars and security competition in Europe and Asia, but a regional conflicts that are drawing the U.S. and Russia test boundaries. Japan increased defensively region where you prolific and materials in the hands of terror states. Road to accidents, nuclear power spiraling into isolation, and state is SOI. Eyes is unstable. Next is the nuclear deterrence. This death penalty sustains credibility of U.S. nuclear deterrence. Again, in 3 U.S. death penalty, effective bolstering credibility of American nuclear deterrence. Americans are able to pay for many times for nuclear adversary was taken into account retributive character. And nuclear deterrence is the bulwark against great powers. Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea are all avenues for escalation. Carter 17 nuclear deterrence are integral to security. Our nuclear enterprise deterrent attacks confidence of adversary systems working smoothly. Nuclear posture assure allies guarantees are credible for weapons themselves. Moscow saber routing so just force reliance. North Korea continues to pursue changing the landscape, pose challenges to peace. The advantage. Their argument is empirically false. Racial divisions were lower in the 1970s with the death penalty moratorium. Conklin 19 or some death penalty into the value racial divisions is if correct, America would have been less racist in the 70s during the moratorium than 90s. And ending the death penalty doesn't stop innocence from being convicted. It actually increases the likelihood that claims of innocence will be canvassed. Sector 14. The naive view without death penalty, false convictions will be corrected towards non-dissent. Inmates rarely have meaningful view of their conviction. Law ways to investigate wrongful conviction like the criminal increase like claims of innocence be canvassed through source concerns flow that innocence asserted by convicted inmates to those facing confinement. And strengthening dignity is not enough. Overcoming incapacitation as a penal rationale is a prerequisite to rejecting retribution. Simon. In 12, absence of dignity, central legal value is reinforced by incapacitation. The penal rationale is within dignity. Then the law to overcome degrading punishment challenges have the greatest effect when can draw developments in culture in which dignity or reconfigure place on a stronger value of dignity. And new federal executions will get tied up in court over injection Saki. In 19, Bar directs government to use a new protocol, one drug rather than 3 will end up in court delay execution, saying you're going to adopt a protocol, same as having a protocol properly adapted. And the plan defers other progressive reforms which would solve the root cause of injustice. Turns the advantage. Sector 20, abolition of death penalty might impede progressive reforms of criminal justice system, eliminate spotlight death, evoke heightened concern and fairness, result in attention on problems that may be otherwise when they're therefore penalizing, and the death penalty may reforms less necessary. Be skeptical. And capital punishment is key to condemning unquestionably guilty killers. Burton and 17 arguments for validating the penalty rely on executing innocence, honestly, why evidence that should be for innocent cases risk is non-existent. Opposing imposition of death penalty on innocent tells very little about the punishment for the guilty. And death penalty incapacitates criminals even if deterrence is unproven. Conklin 19 states there's a lack of research demonstrates that the penalty deters and executing members not deter from committing crimes, rather incapacitated. Next, framing existential risk first. Plumber 15 moral view we adopted to service all beings are eliminated from catastrophe such as nuclear war. There are many people that reducing existential risk are most important. All the doctrine take automatic country intelligence be concerned with promoting good from an impartial view lies undermine no future generation strong reason moral uncertainty to reduce existential risk even one person sure well being a possible future generation matters. Reducing existential risk is most important. Predictions are possible. Fitzsimmons. In 7, burden of proof should belong to the decision maker who rejects probabilistic thinking why given events likely. Predictions require decision makers to expose why given events likely important predictions and force such discipline and making explicit assumptions that might remain implicit. Predictions enhance strategic flexibility when complexity may be resistant or risk-oriented approach teams only viable alternative belief strategy. Unchecked skepticism can marginalize analysis and empowered patriarchal interest undermine line flex. No war is bunk closet. In 18 pieces, unsurprising long periods of common statistic of war. Peace is not neutral. Peace, but a peace was not evidence. Peace will not be another 100 years before statistically a trend results in my options of events from complex systems suggest we university complexity overestimate our ability of statistics or stationary risk of this entry large war is high, and a focus on purely intent-based phase frameworks crushes our ability to respond to violence and complexity, and while making sure the quality up here before the law intended consequences reinforcing protection against racial harm powers of being able to act without having to take actions of harms of others into account just requires intended with complex unintended consequences. Arguments for the simplistic moral message parents those who have been empowered to ignore harmful effects of others need not care about harming conjunction fallacies. Wrong people learn require it all. 18 learning extinguish the effect on only participants they know they are rather than blind spot conjunction reflects uncertainty via words. The effect reflects on decency but tendency to interpret verbal descriptions. Theory requests constitutes model burn appears to be placed on theories of presumed psychological conjunction effect. We do not assume observers are independent adjustment that really obey the rule. Nuisance conjunction represents a fallacy and results suggest error, and the experimenters not its probability to apply for most scenarios of conjunction not hold because participants learn. And behavioral psychology proves we underestimate extinction. Order 20 psychology identified we neglect risks is availability for people estimated likelihood based on recall. We underrate events without precedent availability without risk fails. If we only see believe we step over the precipice scope neglect, we have trouble caring more about something 10 times as important.
Okay, are you good?
Yeah.
What's the status of everything?
Condo status quo is always an option.
Okay, cool. The critique. Why does politics of abolitionism require the federal government to use capital punishment?
I don't necessarily think capital punishment would be included in a world of abolitionism. Our argument is that the AF's, abolishment of capital punishment merely is an act of reform within the criminal justice system. Like you said in cross-sex, you don't even necessarily get rid of life without parole, which the capers of is a super direct indict of.
Okay, what is stopping Abe from not passing the death penalty? Why can he just not do it? Who puts the pressure on him?
I guess I don't know exactly where the pressure comes from, but the Johnson-Ev is so explicit about Japan modeling the US, just because I guess of the way that Japan views themselves as a model of US democracy, but also I don't really know if you can make a no-link argument when the 1AC has made a modeling claim.
Yeah, but the modeling claim isn't about Japan. What evidence do you have that says Japan, knowing that this would be unpopular and jeopardize the government's stability, would still pass this policy?
Sure, I understand that we've definitely made the argument that abolishing capital punishment is unpopular because that is what unseats Abe, but the Johnson-Ev, the lines are so good. It's a response to American abolition would be for Japan to do what it's done in its modern history, adapt and abolish capital punishment. I don't know if there's any link of that's as direct as that.
Okay, the deterrence dissad. What will decision makers in Russia, China, and Iran and North Korea do as soon as they realize the United States no longer has the death penalty?
I guess the Carter-Ev discusses the importance of, the link argument is just that the death penalty demonstrates U.S. resolve and the ability to enact retribution. The Carter-Ev then says that absent that deterrent effect, great powers, China, Russia, will be emboldened, continue nuclear modernization, which could lead to accidents and things like that.
So it's not about the death penalty itself. It's once the death penalty happens, they realize the U.S. has quote blood lost, and then they're we'll act up.
Yeah, surprisingly great.
Sure. The elections dissad, kind of similar question to this other stuff. Who, once seeing that the United States has changed their death penalty policy, decides that it's a good idea to vote for Trump?
I think the Zurcher-Ev, or even in the Lawrence evidence is really good on voters in swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan. There's a lot of voters that are prioritizing criminal justice reform when deciding who to vote for. The Ev speaks to voters specifically in those states being inclined to vote for Trump after the plan.
Okay, so the voters of Michigan are going to see the death penalty happen, and then
we'll read more specific Ev about the death penalty, but both the uniqueness Ev and the link Ev is specific to criminal justice reform being key for those voters.
Cool.
I'm done, but I'm gonna go to the bathroom really quick. I sent it. Y'all get it. Okay, good. Yes, good.
Did you give
Is
an
there an
order?
order?
Oh, boy, yeah. The advantage, framing, states, court's counterplan, the K, the deterrence DA, the Japan DA, and DAA DA, 2020. Sorry. Good? Okay. One and two, one is not responsive. The F is not an attempt to pacify social divisions, only to stop an instance of racialized violence, the state sanctioned murder. One and two, the one is not a referendum on innocence, just the morality of the death penalty. Abolition does not stop innocent convictions, but it does stop innocent murders. One and three, dignity doesn't fail. The F is in a one-stop solution to everything wrong with the criminal justice system. Prioritizing human dignity is a platform for future reform. One and four, states cannot circumvent. This card does not assume outright abolition. Brown v. Board proves federal enforcement beats state foot dragging. One and five, federal executions are moving forward. Recent murder proofs and waiting to be executed only compounds suffering. One and six, pacifying reforms is not a reason to continue state-sanctioned murder. Those are uncertain, and this card only says that using future reforms as a justification for abolition is wrong, not that the death penalty should not be abolished. One and seven and eight do not say death penalty is key to condemning the guilty. Other sentences solve death penalty is not just torture, and the logic of incapacitation is violence. Even where guilt is proven. Framing infinite deferral to existential risk is debilitating. If magnitude is always infinite, any extinction risk will trump an ongoing impact no matter the probability. It preserves the status quo due to selection bias. That's Kessler and cannot a lack of respect for human dignity turns their arguments. It's necessary to sustain the essential meaning of the human that was conceded. Predictions are possible, but Fitzsimmons does not assume the structure of their DAs, which fall prey to the conjunctive fallacy. Multiplying each argument reduces collective risk to nearly zero. No war is not bunks. Baggett cites their closet evidence have more accurate data set by measuring war in per capita terms, which suggests war is unlikely. We do not reject consequentialism, only argue that negative consequences of the plan are not likely to happen. Conjunctive fallacy argument does not assume the structure of the DAs. Our argument isn't that the fallacy is entrenched, but that long causal chains of disads are illogical and unlikely. We do not underestimate existential risk in debate. Overestimation is endemic. Infinite overestimation is worse. That was above. The state's counterplan, leaving federal executions intact, is reason enough to reject it. The logic of sufficiency framing is violent and calculative. Prioritizing human dignity requires a wholesale rejection of state-chasing murder. The federal government will expand use of its own death penalty in response to the counterplan. Manheimer 17 gives word nationalists unlikely federal government decommission death penalty. More likely states will bondage capital punishment likely to expand use of federal death penalty. States failed to be factors decommission death penalties. That's simply non-violent. States federal condemning murder to fire and move to interstate commerce for applies to most gun-related murders. Measures state the limit federal competence used to seize the death penalty. States or capital punishments not on the books. No modeling. Rango 1908 205 08. The court narrowed the death penalty scope of the ordinance to conservative justices. Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and 5-4 conservative majority solidly behind the death penalty. Gorsuch said the Eighth Amendment is not guaranteed to preserve painless death. Permutation do both. It's indistinguishable from follow-on and avoids net benefits or the counterplan links to them all. Simultaneous uniform 50 state fiat is voting issue. It's not assumed in the literature mimics federal action and invites contrived solvency deficits. Rejects them for deterrence and links to elections. Rango 19 California. Not a threat of execution forcing death to an issue for general election. Threat of families and victims are not thrilled. Courts counterplan permutation do the counterplan all. Of our evidence describes the F as the court prefer normal means guided by evidence and most predictable grounded in the literature and act applies to judge-made law. While 7 recorders of judges pass the court and acts law courts fulfill clause and legislative function appropriate use determine act describing judge-made law is contextually accurate. Games of six court no notes your next remedy amicus judges are not going to care the remedies legislative for our interpretation. A definite ground courts are most important part of criminal justice reform. D an advantage ground is better. B legal accuracy even if an act usually refers to Congress it's the best term to describe courts actions with a legislative effect. C reject agent counterplan seal. One is the substantive content and shift debate through procedural questions. This were for topic education, affairs, and research. Permutation do both. It's also linked to NDAA because the F is no longer partisan. After a conservative court passes it, it takes no floor time. It links to 2020. If the right Trump is looking to capitalize on CJR, he'll take credit. Courts are too slow. Nichols citations matters more. Sees Belcher death penalty. Execution slow is not enough to wait for courts. Plus, suggested nature rights denied as Trump sees split visual support from dead house members. Policies that just legislate prohibit the death penalty. Counterplan gets circumvented. Only the plan can solve Trump's ruckus by making sure we fiat the whole federal government. Conditionality is voting issue. Disincentivizes straight turning in the 2AC leads to poor file writing on the neg voting issue for research and strategy, redact the team for deterrence, the K away the plan versus the status quo or competitive alternative. One, fairness, the plan is the locus for preparation to ground, abrogating it is the link for offense, it's infinite and unpredictable. Two, clash testing, theorization via specific scenarios, renders analysis more meaningful. We win under the framework our prioritization of human dignity ensures the absence of reform remains revolutionary, not piecemeal. Perm do both. Cats curse. Nice if you don't check underlying system corporate use going self-command performance approach code stays on for reducing claim many cases be in rental all the words in the increment of just doing incremental work and if it's on alignment and move it properly for part of stretching each increment as building power it's worth doing reforms and link logic is debilitating and backwards makes any intermediate action impossible. Second 19 critical reforms are too incremental. The question should be weighing magnitude of improving against likelihood of entrenchment, assistance and transformation. Nothing sees close for only supplies for real reduction of human misery. First step's the only way to get a second step. Alt fails too vague. Lancaster 17 prison abolition is a slow game that cultivate morality to hobble the left for ambiguity. Many are confused about the range such words model substantive disagrees on what before we did decide to pursue agenda far beyond any society has reached a cycles or structure of plan inclusive alts or voting issue. They take the only intrinsic predictable when they see offense voting issue for Afghan deterrence DA. Are you fucking serious? Keep the death penalty to deter Russia is the most obvious example of the kind of ridiculous risk calculus that results from infinite deferral to utilitarianism and existential risk. Reject it. And then the rest of their DAs, nuclear posture, technical capabilities, declarations, etc. all outweigh their link card is one line aside that some guy wrote in 2003 when he was probably high off of his ass and has zero empirical support. Deterrence theory is illogical, brash. 19 deterrence theory pursuits. Those are the fingers on the triggers of rational actors will also become in certain extreme social conditions. Everything about cube psychology, justice is those are people after misperception, revenge, irrational act, appropriate naturally are to mental endless deterrence. Fails for other reasons. Brash 18 deterrence, many passive failure, risk associated like confessional war, accidental use of rational use of false alarms, numerous accidents are lost. Japan, DA, COVID, thumb, Suzuki 20, Abe finds itself another political scene. It could be just like civil premiership, coronavirus, eroding confidence in leadership, regaining public trust may be harder than before. Appreciation of landscape policy, full force not helps his image and angered LP lawmakers. The link is nonsensical. If abolition is unpopular, Abe will not abolish the death penalty, especially so close to an election and with COVID. That was cross-next time frame distinction modeling is an instant and Abe's up for re-election next year. Public support for retention is not predictive. Japanese attitudes will shift with top-down reform side of 14 stories. Then abolitionist countries try removal of death penalty on action, not command public support. However, those after abolition try to less support death penalty friend. Primarily, the public consider abolition is acceptable. Japanese governors keep mind open beyond rhetoric from jury super. Japanese public on like abolition. The act provides cover and legitimacy. It allows Abe to shift blame to the U.S. That's Johnson. No alternative to Abe's Sector 17 Abe's appreciate for studies. Japanese know things to be worse than summer. So stable before start linking friends up. Abe's in his search for cancer free, but doesn't give Abe for the London magazine Korea Hawkins. I know Japan co-op is meaningless fluff. Military disputes are leader agnostic and overwhelmed relations. Low now Senkaku Sano. Seven is trying to go to military ISIS as easy as to start a message here. Senkaku on side. Joseph Garces LDP drive for Boris Yachting to Abe to cancel safe as his negative cycle. Abe not keynote card sets of replacement will be worse for relations. It's empirically hawkish. No war, Moss 13 wars. Not like a bitch December, but defeat be possibilities you do independence war abuse disasters to both the weaknesses. PLA would honor my confidence. Unknown for U.S. intervention enough to give China pause. NDAA. No link. The plan is immediate. Doesn't suck floor time or it's not immediate. Lawmakers will push off until after NDAA is passed. Floor time DAs are bad. They can try fiat to maximize the neg link. No link is delayed until November. Wyken 7. 2. Fight a will enter reconciliation likely be November 4. We pass this bill last year. Not signed until December. Police reform debate slammed. 2. Very 7. Cyber. Steps are about to force a debate on racial justice. Stakes are governor. Showtime including provision. Police reform budget proposal. Find negotiations. Divisive issues. Move exacerbated off short-term college really struggle. Make concessions policy. Takes a momentum for abolishing death penalties. Growing no links. Sub 19. This feels like trade war for the death penalty. We see different faiths. Maybe save Russia. Serve Greece. Become a service. Not government station. Station more tolerance. Is right political tax. We know the left is no longer voting on death penalties. People will right and left. Silly promoting repeal. NDA does not solve COVID. Rally. 20. Bill takes no notice of pandemic. City governors suppression impact COVID. Barely much poor prevalence. Virus. If you believe also not help rebuild institutions or just vulnerability. By COVID-19 does not represent true prioritization. Nothing's being sacrificed. Money is insufficient. Mask refusing American stump. No extinction level mutations. It's a one-line suggestion that are card unsupported by scientific evidence. Trump will veto. Olson. Next time I want Trump to veto if includes amendment by Warren aims at renaming military assets. 2020. No impact. First term proof. Trump can talk the talk but won't walk the walk. And White House checks any irrational impulses. COVID thumbs. Matthew 17 is economy going to damage Trump's chances. Gas COVID. Political consequences. These if your economic performance as a profound fact. The economy puts on the list path for Trump or Trump when inevitable. Harbor 614. Clear suggest Trump will be elected. May not be blocked with a majority of voters thought Trump would win. Dumpers and black swans. Cherokee 20 of 16 years service. Rate 5 is important to run to healthcare security gun. Education and economy. Those are priority defense and the increased importance of issues to courts and state infrastructure support. Reject any link card that cites high black support for Trump before June. The Republicans intrinsic to Trump, not criminal justice reform. Nelson 20 black voters are probably what Trump is peddling the black vote. Looted Republicans is the primary for Trump isn't CJ problems in history for such more five years for housing determinations, open racist tax on black women. Trump will move no black female voters into his column. First step act thumbs February 19 pending. Chris says for 94 crime bill. Trump deciding substance leading from candidate because again first step act reduce prison sentences or thousands raised. Trump pays from African Americans. So does his recent exo partisanship outweighs policy. Bit cover 19 countries have partisan environments like Edition 2020. So does the popular Trump is well over 90% of Republicans bullies doesn't pierce unless I matter in partisanship. Be artificially generated. The plan will be forgotten. Ruben 18 is unlikely matter during Trump. The next year following the new cycle should make this a distant memory. He won't take credit for the plan. Swan 7-1 Trump told people he regrets supporting CJR 6 his own 1966 national word century campaign typist Trump made clear he won't do anything seen as undercutting police job for one reform is misguided and won't win any more African Americans for Trump issue tweets that like no ambiguity describe the alarm as a symbol of hate. GOP hates the plan, alienates core support staff and 19 strong majority of Republicans support the death penalty parties divide Americans overall ready to abolish adult said it's a bad idea, including 79% of Republicans who are Trump's current voters. Polls fail Rosanello. 19 groups are underrepresented. Issues could repair polls not weighed by education. Less educated voters have to be harder to reach. Understated Trump support wealthy Republicans superior to blacks and still interferes with supported Trump. Try Trump. No, 526 being clear from your representative sample is hard. 15% said they decided last week. Many change their minds. Even a perfect poll may not gauge the outcome.
Okay, are you good?
Mm-hmm.
The Japan dissat, I'm confused about the no link argument given the 1AC's made a global modeling claim and identified like every continent following on, like who models the plan.
The 1AC did not say every country immediately does the plan in exactly the fashion that the plan happens. It said that it instigates a global conversation about the death penalty, right? We also don't think that global modeling is necessary to win a debate. Also, like the logic of the DA makes no sense because we have introduced an argument that says it instigates a global conversation, but then you have introduced an argument that in Japan this policy would be extremely unpopular. So why would Abe adopt it? He's up for re-election soon.
Okay, that's fine. I'm just gonna move on. The uniqueness evidence you read about COVID, it's just like it's causing like a scandal for Abe. Like the ev that we've read about the plan says that it would potentially make it so he can't be reelected. I guess I'm confused why this thumps like re-election. It's just like it causes a political scandal, but it never says that like Abe won't be elected because of it.
You're correct. The card does not say therefore he will not be reelected, but it's hurting his support. It's making him look horrible. Those are obviously reasons why a leader would not be reelected. Also, COVID is a thing that's on everyone's minds. It proves, like, one, he's not going to deal with the death penalty right now if there's not, like, fiat pushing his butt. And two, no one's going to fucking pay attention because they're concerned about, like, dying from a global pandemic.
Okay, sure. The 2020 dissad. So I guess the argument or the evidence you read about the First Step Act is like Trump is campaigning on this. And then you've read another card that's like Trump won't take credit for the plan. I'm confused why those aren't in contention with each other.
They are either or arguments. If you win that it is likely he will campaign on criminal justice, he can already do so now, but we will, as a first condition, make the argument that he will not campaign on criminal justice.
Right. Like I understand that maybe there's not like an all-out concession we can make, but I'm confused if it's true, like that Trump is trying to use the First Step Act to leverage voter support. Why wouldn't he take credit for the plan to keep that momentum going?
Why does he need the plan to keep that momentum going? Like the First Step Act either thumps your link or he's not going to take credit for the plan. They are either or arguments, and you're correct that you cannot make a concession to get out of either of them.
Okay, that's fine. I guess you've read Ev also on elections that the conservatives hate the death penalty. The Stubbs evidence says momentum for abolishing, the Stubbs evidence on the NDAA dissad says momentum for abolishing the death penalty is growing. These seem in contention with each other. Why can't we?
So do your DAs.
Well, sure, but I mean, like you haven't made a concession. Why can't we concede that like momentum for the death penalty abolishment is growing? That's like a link.
I guess you can, but like Jesus, that's kind of weird because you read DAs with links that were in contention with each other. So yeah, we responded to both of the links.
Okay, sure. The state's counterplan, the EV that's like, it links to the net benefit. It's like California abolished this death penalty and then Trump tweeted about it. Why does that mean he's going to campaign on the state's abolishing the death penalty?
Well, it means that he can. He has the ability to. So if you win a link, you have to win for the DA that he actively wants to campaign on criminal justice reform and will take advantage of the plan. If that is true, he will also take advantage of the counterplan and say, look what all these governors are doing. Like, I'm the GOP, like, whatever the fuck he says on Twitter. I don't know.
Okay, sounds good. We'll take some
We have 6:54. Let me know when everyone's got it and is good for an order.
I'm good for an order.
Nina, are you good? States counterplan, courts counterplan, Japan disad, deterrence DA, critique, the advantage, framing. Okay, is everyone ready?
Hold on. I haven't are we doing college times for these or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, now is everyone good? All right. The state's counterplan solves 100% of the F insofar as there's a solvency deficit applies equally as much to the 1AC because the states have the ability to circumvent any court ruling, and also maybe some of the conservative justices that would rule for the plan would say it would violate the dignity of the states to say that they cannot abolish the death penalty on their own. The counterplan solved the case by eventually spurring the court to rule that capital punishment is unconstitutional under its underlying standards of decency doctrine, but the plan still links to elections by acting too quickly. It is indeed a difficult task to abolish the death penalty judicially. Majority of the world is now rejecting the punishment critical part of the states have not. It is very doubtful the court will declare the death penalty unconstitutional anytime in the near future. Politicians need to start making a conscientious vote to abandon the death penalty and say legislators if this were to happen there might be the same rejection of death penalty in Congress. The youth may abandon the death penalty de facto. This would happen in majority jurisdictions. The Supreme Court will step in and declare the death penalty unconstitutional where all offenses states can play a leadership role despite federal inaction. Arnold in 19 when it comes to the death penalty, the federal government could learn something from the states. States can invoke human rights norms to justify the abolishing the death penalty. Very 17 human rights and not combined in the court's death penalty jurisprudence. State legislative invoke the human rights supporting the repealing of the death penalty as of governors. Yes, modeling Millet and Nate. The Supreme Court to see the public opinion is used restricting them ultimately abolishing the death penalty. The Supreme Court based the death penalty decisions greatly on but the individual legislatures in each state are done acting like the House of Lords in England. That answers their first two arguments because having the federal government leave it in place doesn't make sense. The court would eventually rule as a result of the states. There's no impact to delay. And we solve all the states being able to impose it. The federal government has not done a capital punishment, has not imposed capital punishment since 2003, which proves that there's no solvency differential between the plan and the counterplan. The federal government will not expand it. That also is disproven by the fact that there's a current disparity in laws between the states and the federal government as it relates to the death penalty. So there's no basis for this claim. The modeling argument was answered about permutation to both links and that benefit because Trump became credit for it because the federal government was the one who did it. He cannot take or claim credit for the states because they are the ones that acted first, and voters will not attribute it to him. They say that it's a voting issue. 50 state fiat is good when a solvency advocate or one is the evidence says that collective state action is superior. Prefer a literature-based interpretation. A real-world policy experts consider the counterplan in the literature. It's arbitrary and non-predictable to exclude it from negative RSL. B is the literature supports 50 state uniformity is the central question on a CGR topic. 2 is negative ground checks. Tiny yes or no federal defense. Nobody goes on. T substantial. The status quo is indefensible. Judges are liberal. It's the only functional limit. The alternatives are proliferation of insignificant federal measures. It's reciprocal. There are solvency deficits, and there are solvency deficits which proves that there is no offense to their interpretation. 3 is a relevant policy choice. National lawmakers, students, and practitioners must compare and choose in criminal justice reform. Reject the argument. The team they say links to net benefit. That was the argument that was answered above. Also, all of their no modeling claims globally do not assume all 50 states acting uniformly to impose to get rid of the death penalty on human dignity ground, which obviously solves, and none of their evidence assumes that the court's counterplan not going for a concede permutation due to the counterplan. Concede that normal means is the plan going through the court. We will concede that the courts are too slow and the counterplan gets circumvented. Normally, this argument doesn't make sense, but it does when the plan is obviously normal means going through the court as per their 1AC evidence as well as the 2AC definition on permutation.
do the counterplan. That proves that all the circumvention arguments in the courts being too slow takes out the case, and they cannot win an impact to delay based on follow-on on the other state's counterplan. And we will concede the argument that the courts would link to 2020 because Trump would be able to claim credit because they are part of the federal government. That means that they cannot use it as a no-link argument for the elections data. Conditionality is good. One, logic disproving the counterplan does not prove the plan is good. Their rational interpretation kills education, particularly two, critical thinking. Multiple words to make their best arguments. Three, real-world education policy makers best of their arguments on the left and right. Four, neglect secrets and asking more private claims out. We see five is key to testing master interpretation. Lose the negative to try six is not a voting issue. They must win. What we did made it impossible. Anything else trades out with substance. The Japan DA. The Japan DA always enters the case. Abe is necessary to manage Japanese and Chinese tensions that inevitably escalates into a nuclear war. And when you think about it, a nuclear war is a death penalty being imposed on billions of innocent people, which proves that we turn the case. Abe is key to sustain U.S.-Japan relations. That solves a multitude of security concerns. 17, Abe has a large Japan cooperative with the tackling the region's security challenges, including North Korea and China piracy and role of terrorism and national disaster. The U.S. cannot face the challenges below forward allied support. Critical ingredients to success. Abe is a strong support of the U.S. strategic objectives, strengthening the ties that unprecedented ways invested in diversified set of security partners with key regional states, Australia, India, Vietnam, and the Philippines. Tokyo is our capable of taking security rules in cooperation with the U.S. Local strength plays a proactive role along the U.S. Only Japan can currently provide this. U.S. Japan alliance is the only reachable vehicle, multifaceted, cooperative approach, retaining crucial kinetic requirements that we can have a possibility that the U.S. found itself in a weaker position to meet today's security challenges. They say coronavirus. Abe's popularity is rebounding. Reuters in 621 public support. Abe's cabinet rose 9% reports that the recent had fallen. Abe's not some of the explosive surge of coronavirus infections. Also, their uniqueness evidence does make a definitive claim about how it will affect Abe, just as the coronavirus has been unpopular in Japan. Obviously, it's put him on the brink, which proves our argument duly. In 20, Abe is getting past several political scandals, look past the benefit of doubt among the Japanese voters who passed expectations handling the coronavirus during the reservoir goodwill is built up over 7 years of our own parties feeling safe speaking out against him. We can state the next argument doesn't make any sense. They say that the link is nonsense because Japan won't do it because it's unpopular. The one he made a global modeling claim that was explicit. Second star evidence indicates that the U.S. is the current actor in the international system that is upholding the death penalty, which means that other democracies feel that they can sustain it. After the U.S. gets rid of it, it means that other democracies will feel that they can do it. And so, well, Steiger and Steiger 19, if the U.S. revolves the death penalty process worldwide recognition, moral norm against the death penalty, increasingly the U.S. current religion is the greatest obstacle. The recognition of such a norm, given this role, the most powerful and influential constitutional democracy, mean the matter Christian democracies of Japan to repudiate the practices. It means that the politicians of Japan would feel an incentive to go along with what the United States is doing, but it can still cause public backlash, which people pass policies all the time that result in public backlash. They say that there's a time frame distinction doesn't make any sense. Our evidence indicates that there's a coming China-Japanese tensions that Abe is necessary to manage, which answers their next year argument. They say that the public support is not predictive. Japanese citizens perceive executions as critical to maintaining social order. In 11, Japan increasing imposition of death penalty. All executions taking place extreme the secrecy bureaucratic seem to be served to make the death penalty less likely to public consciousness and suppress public opinion matter to elect official public perception social order would decay the country become more dangerous and rising combat public perception. Now be recorded around for abolition death penalty Japan, not the death penalty ever fall below 50%. The plan erodes the legitimacy of Japan's political institutions. Sato and 14 public percent legitimacy of determined public aside of the law criminal shall argue that the courts maintain the legitimacy of warning against the disregarding public opinion. Public does not accept opinion policies. This good work subject to legitimacy country political institution wars can result in non-compliance of right of cooperative criminal justice system and vigilantism. They say that there's no alternative to Abe. That's our argument. The plan forces him to lose power, which means that more bureaucratic hawks are likely to take control of the Japanese government. They say that relations are low now. It's not about positive relations being able to solve a litany of existential threats. It's rather that Abe has the ability to manage Japanese-Chinese tensions as it relates to islands disputes and the Senkaku. They say that Abe is not key. Yes, he is. That's Mura and 19. Japanese progressive. Hello to Japan's response to Chinese rights program. Constant reflexive opposition, photos are proactive thinking. The Constitution has been launched from the results perceived attacking against Constitution. That go being Constitution loses gravity once it moves every challenge. That's good. The background clamor will get louder. Received for opposition struggling to construct meaningful foreign policy. The long term build up enough capital. Last year with the car circle factors given innovation that may have the form of foreign policy realm firmly on paper. There's no practical reason for Japan's opposition leader think much beyond the basic foreign policy question. The opposition little reassures respective stakeholders interested in certain Indian MC like of alternative structural status quo combat with the practical relations government is also studied most developments of the progressive foreign policy. So forth, they say that there's no war. That's not true. Our evidence indicates there will be aggressive claims in the Senkaku, and only Abe has the ability to be able to manage that, even if he does not. U.S.-Japan relations are necessary to solve a litany of existential threats. The deterrence is that not going for concede that deterrence is illogical. Sorry if we offended you. The critique not going for concede the permutation just a test of competition. Their alternative fails card says that the reason the alternative fails is because it's hopelessly vague and it makes an appeal to morality. Hello, what do you think their appeal to human dignity is in the one you see, especially when they can't even define it? The advantage. The death penalty does not enhance racial divisions. Their argument is ahistorical. The 70s were more racist than the 90s, but there was a moratorium on capital punishment. That's a Conklin evidence. It also doesn't stop wrongful convictions because lawyers will not go back and review cases, so they just condemn innocents to different sentences like life without parole. That's a Steiger evidence. Dignity fails and is vague. Conservatives in the court, the Senate, or the executive will obviously water it down to the point where it's absolutely meaningless, and they will also ensure that more harsh punishments are placed on criminals because they want to be perceived as being tough on crime. Incapacitation serves as a penal rationale, means dignity alone fails. The underlying logic will always justify harsh punishments. That's the Simon evidence. Dignity-based assessment assessments are flawed. Conklin 19, Malkani compares slavery to the death penalty. Dignity grounds argue that they're protecting someone who dies in autonomy. The dignity murder because two attackers were not given punishment calls the question taken about treatment as well. The issue dignity assessment of proportionality punishment. Malkani's go agree with the notion of proportionality over some of the one idea assessment of the issue. Malkani's no position that slavery the death penalty equally undignified was not sure whether was not observed by any slavery abolitionists. New federal executions are being held up over injections. Now that's a shock. Evidence proves that they're declining broadly. Federal executions are still tied up to Vogue and 4-7. The DOJ will appeals court to know that there's still other issue need resolutions. The executions remain on hold with litigation. Continue the government to seek to resolve all the plaintiffs' claim that one thing that judges agree upon is that those significant levels of factual legal issues in the district court that needs to be able to resolve also demonstrates that there will be circumvention that takes out the app and proves that they do not solve any of their internal links to the case. The framing page. Extinction outweighs existential risk come first. The 2EC just says that tinkering with numbers is bad. Our argument is that risk is magnitude times probability, and we will win a larger risk of our offense as a plumber. Evidence are sweeping. K doesn't apply. Force them to explain how it applies in the context of each specific disset. Otherwise, it's a complete non-starter. Same with the conjunctive fallacy. That outweighs. Palm 18. So catastrophe is more important than that is the man who go saying the loss of all future generation. 500 trillion lives never underestimate the risk equals probability times time in society. Try 500 jobs harder to prevent go catastrophe in the disabled person level. Everyone has their own feelings, their own arguments. The widely held position human life should be valued equally. The laws are sequence available to which is considered as irrespective of which member they have a value. Everyone equally such as higher value reducing GCR. There's Simpson evidence about 0.2% doesn't have a single warrant highlighted. Their conjunctive fallacy argument also falls apart because you should need to evaluate each specific internal link, not just castigate them as saying that they're all bad. Existential risks are cognitively underestimated, which flips their impact calculus. 19 psychology causes us to ignore risk. The ability of influence also visible. Existential risks are not available. Unability of influence also otherwise affected the decision how we feel about others. The reason human beings are terrible. Existential risk privilege and memories of the numbers. We feel more empathy one, even though that we should care about the multiple people. This is a correlated inability or empathy erodes the decimals grow. Pronounce it the future lies. They can't win the sweeping no war thesis. Our evidence says the theory is bucking or disset makes the risk of it uniquely likely. Stats are net closet in 18. The realism market shows and empirical evidence on line kind of conflict generating process and model realization are difficult to resolve. Evidence is not overwhelming, inherently relevant. Question is inherently statistical data driven analysis between wars. Mark that card at between wars.
You good?
Yeah.
So I want to start on the Japan DA. Who pressures Abe to abolish the death penalty?
Abe feels pressure from the international community because the main stakeholder that has said that the death penalty is a legitimate form of punishment has since repudiated it, and he wants to comply with other democracies globally.
U.S. abolishes the death penalty. Abe feels pressure to comply or to follow other democracies. In this Bay 11 card, you have highlighted this line that says, public opinion surely matters to elected officials in any democracy. A common problem facing abolition of the death penalty is that public perception is not a fertile ground for abolition. Why does Abe care more about the perception of the international community than his constituents close to an election year?
Well, because Abe is particularly concerned with his image in the international community, given his
Why more so than his ability to get reelected?
Well, so our argument is not solely about Abe's prospects for winning re-election. Broadly, our argument is that Abe is making a sort of stance, and he cannot explicitly go against and repudiate the United States getting rid of the death penalty because he wants to comply with other liberal democracies globally.
That's not
the
at all what you said.
Dislikes it. Our argument is that oftentimes politicians implement policies that are not popular with the public. You also can't go for this no modeling claim because you've said that the plan catalyzes the global anti-death penalty movement.
Generally, not in a country where you said there is like a huge public sentiment that like loves capital punishment.
Well, this may be surprising, but pretty much every country in South and Southeast Asia also don't like capital punishment.
Who replaces Abe?
Our argument is that the LDP doesn't have a good enough replacement currently.
But if he gets booted out, someone has to replace him. So are you saying that someone else from the LDP gets elected?
Well, there are a bunch of bureaucratic hawks in the LDP that might take Abe's place in the next election. But also, our argument is about
we don't even know who takes Abe's place, or that they would be more hawkish towards China.
There's one specific guy. Let me find his name.
There's one specific guy. No, that's okay. On the state's counterplan, I want to ask about your answer on the state's counterplan to the links to the net benefit argument. You say that Trump can't take credit for the counterplan. We both agree now that the plan is the court. Why can he take credit for something the court has done?
One second. When I said Ishiba, my series started, so I didn't hear that question.
Okay. State's counterplan. You said Trump cannot take credit for the counterplan. We all agree the AF is now the court. Why can he take credit for the court?
We all agree that the AF is not the court?
Is now the court.
Yeah, is now the court, because you made a court's link to elections argument in the 2EC.
So that's it?
Yeah, I conceded it.
Okay, But the logic for that is the same as the logic for why the counterplan leads to that benefit.
No, because the federal government and Trump's justices having to vote in favor for it is distinct from all 50 states doing it.
Quickly, I want to clarify, Japan is not a net benefit to this, correct?
Not a net benefit to states? Yeah. No, it's not.
Okay, I'm sending it out.
Wait, our call lapsed, Stephen, but do you want to take prep before that? Maybe just like a second.
Yeah.
Oops. I'll call you back. Oh, fuck.
We're stopping. We're stopping prep. We have like little idea how much prep we just took. Probably
We
like
forgot to start it, so, you know, it felt like a minute.
yeah, that seems about right.
Did it feel like more than a minute? That's fine.
While I'm sending it, the order is NDAA politics and then elections. Sorry, it's just loading kind of slowly. Okay, does everyone have it? Okay, yeah.
Did this hand motion was like, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, now
Oh,
I
okay,
wasn't
yeah.
for a minute though. Thank you.
My thing is still loading.
Okay, yeah.
Who wants to guess the number of kids that will end up watching this? Over under 15.
I vote like 6.
No, my lab's gonna be super into this. They're all gonna watch this.
My lab is going to be really upset with me. They wanted me to go for a K. That's what I said.
It's not too late.
Well, they said, well, okay, they were like, go for abolition. I was like, okay. But then they did that like abolition demo debate. So I like rechecked at the lab. I was like, what should I go for now? And they were like, go for settler colonialism. I was like, I'm not the guy that you want to see like demonstrate how to go for settler colonialism.
Right, I think we're all good. Grace.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Concede no extinction level mutations. We aren't going for it. Concede the stub step. It's a link to the elections. It's that and takes out the base turn. Says conservatives oppose the death penalty and everyone is against it. Concede fiat is immediate, which means the plan can be pushed off the elections. Is that Trump re-election causes extinction, reduce ally commitments, quickly spurs regional conflicts, security competitions, rapid proliferate, causes global nuclear war. That's right. Does that outweighs one nuclear war? Is the ultimate death penalty for everyone. Causes unthinkable amounts of unnecessary death. 2 turns human dignity death. Is dehumanizing. 3 turns racial injustice. Nuclear strikes for urban centers that include large black populations. For Biden election solves death penalty. Political 422 candidates use competed to look up on crime. 2020 is different. Biden reverses what's owing capital, which means the federal level instead of states and policy. 5. They're all. What is the author? Vote 6 as preventative. Permitting conflict comes source 2019 codification by human rights stability failed curve. Dangerous practices that make armed problem more likely to such human rights. Just idle title the past 4 years. Don't disprove it. No one can restrain him. Re-elections key. Republicans in Washington have been hesitant to greenlight Trump's agenda, but 4 more years give them no choice. That's right. And Trump re-election causes complete abandonment of U.S. leadership. Order 18. Trump has said, altered U.S. strategy being controlled U.S. between Trump re-election. We will see a fundamental shock. Trump will be more willing to tolerate cause of introducing a strategy. Return to would lead a withdraw from NATO. Withdraw from Gulf NATO. American policy would how are we to Spanish acceptance threats? Presidential will be wild as shit. Trump loses 1 polling cruise. He's feeling Biden and base support isn't enough to win that search or 2 swing states. He's losing them. Code 625. Trump wants to figure out 6 battle states advantage. What is nearly advantage with Biden leading support immunization. White combination 368 is the race. Still time with the president political scene to provide support among voters in the economy. At least issues are connected on race. 3 Democratic unity. Hurst 3 10. Biden wall of sanity taking command of 1 treasures. Democratic Party. Democrats chancing the White House back has dramatically improved. Danger Trump electoral process is now straightforward. COVID doesn't ensure Trump will lost 1. Coronavirus hurts the Democrats 2, and Trump has time to overcome Senators 18 because of coronavirus. So have campaigns suspended. Rallies are open. Initial president Trump standing in handle protection. Re-election. 2 simple president. Change sovereign tone. Democrats are already bad where he can mold the narrative. 2 The margins are super thin. Even just a few thousand people are swayed that can swing the entire election. Burdock in 19. Trump needs more than GOP base and job approval. Trump must assure swing voters something. All these fierce forces 1,000 of them are secure. New Hampshire, 8,000 of them are Tennessee, Minnesota. That would add 14 electoral votes to marginal gains in Philadelphia, Naples, Albuquerque, Pennsylvania, Florida, New York City. Slight advantage to the victory. It's not inevitable. That was answered above. There are no thumpers. 1 link to be proves the importance of the act. 2 other issues are our uniqueness. The plan's positive destruction of our city. In 19th first by Congress, what if you see the first act? If we hear the first episode meter and the other can do the other candidate have to continue transportation and as administration should for Trump to take away from direction of the conversation. 3 secondary issues can swing the election. Specifically true for CJR Turner. In 19, CJR has become a hot topic in the campaign. 2 times how changed support for CJR cuts for the opportunity to be one of the issues the best messenger for stuff highlighted the changing politics of the nation. Secondary issues to the outside world and outcome. Keep your eye on CJR. The plan swings the election in Trump's favor. I'll do the link debate here. 1 reconciliation. Searcher says Trump loses now because the public wants empathy and reconciliation about abolition of the death penalty. Demonstrates the commitment to those qualities. 2 public support is in favor of abolishing the death penalty. DPAC 20 record percent of American voters want the politically acceptable. I don't know about the record 67% of conservatives said the politically acceptable. Record 6% of Americans were for life since capital punishment. A pretty erratic shift in opinion. 3 swing states. The margin of difference in states like Pennsylvania and Michigan and small additional CJR initiatives would prove decisive. That's Lawrence 4. Trump is desperately trying to persuade himself as a CJR reformer. He needs victories past the first step back. So 20 Trump's attempt to save himself CDR with the deterrence has given Trump's island have for the Trump tax for step back again. The best choices have been modest reforms. Biden laid out specific policies. Trump has nothing about bragging, but the plan gives Trump that key accomplishment. CJR is a salient issue. Trump in 19 CJR reforms become an issue. 2020 Trump announces from Trump opportunity to take advantage of the void. These underestimated impact of electoral reform. Criminal justice been central for candidates. Candidates substantial policy preference issue put a share button for candidate to be held accountable. Take it for granted. That alone turns case Trump re-election cements white nationalism, fascism. Hasten in 18 American democracy and crisis. I think militarization of rhetoric and behavior really non-functional. It's passion about best white nationalism. The jobs of negotiate with Trump only to defend them. We have read recent evidence about black support since June 1 and see searchers suggest potential for Trump to capture more voter support. The problem is not intrinsic to Trump. 1 Nelson is from months ago, and we have read evidence that he can attract support through policy. 2 there are evidence about black voters are linked. Evidence is specific to swing voters more broadly. The First Step Act doesn't thump. 1 it proves that Trump will campaign on it, which takes out this 1 evidence. 2 Trump cannot rely on the first step alone. Cimarella in 20 Trump is making zero to think that he'll have to do more. He wants to be serious criminal justice. His ability to think that re-election Trump was referring to the first step. Trump would do more if he wants to be bragged about. He actually from criminal justice, so he'll have to do more. That's specifically true among black voters. New policies are key. Ross 26 Trump. I know that the black voters Americans are buying Trump's arguments. He's much policies. Administration is Trump is a short on substance, contradicting governments and how he markets is remarkable. The next argument is about partisanship, but the overwhelming majority of voters vote on policy, not partisanship. Fowler in 20 how do American voters decide candidates to support this and are largely influenced by policy preferences, some form of partisan intoxication. However, this has been around broad alliteration, so Dutch voters not care about policy. Intoxicated voters are a small share of American electoral policy, but it is more prevalent. We see our clear sign voters' decisions are influenced by policy and substance, and all the specific link evidence proves that CJR is that policy preference, is that policy decision that voters will vote on. It won't be forgotten. 1 the election is in a few months. There's not a lot that can happen. They have read no on things that will come up. 2 their evidence is like 1 line long, and from 2018 it doesn't assume the magnitude of our links. Trump does take credit. 1 their evidence doesn't apply at all. It's about how Trump won't restrain the police. That doesn't mean he won't support the plan. 2 Trump uses the plan to capitalize on national need for criminal justice. Collins and 6 8 Trump appearing out of such outpouring of support for racial justice and sort of ability to call for unity. Trump said as being still to the president turn the rhetoric who consider racial important campaign issues health economy as the economy and healthcare. Democrats are gathering behind reform bill. The president may be missing a chance to catch the national mood. 3 doesn't assume Trump actively signing off on the plan. He won't be able to criticize a policy that he supported. The link turn. 1 conservatives aren't key to elections. Swing states and independent voters are more important. 2 a litany of examples prove the base is resilient. McAdams in 19 Trump never exceeded 47% approval rating. We really did below 37% core of support that refuses to shrink despite malicious impeachment, sexual misconduct, financial irregularities, unprecedented behavior policies that have been support among its loyal allies. 3, their evidence concedes support for capital punishment is rapidly falling. 2, EC Stanton. In 19, many use of the death penalty at federal levels, arbitrary use of who ultimately faces punishment that has been affected in public support. Capital punishment has fallen over all in public opinion. Support for execution has fallen, and that's in 1990, 78% supported the death penalty. Since then, support has waned. 4, the stubs on the NDAA elections they said was about conservatives supporting the death penalty or supporting abolishing the death penalty, which proves they can't go for this argument. Polling is not bad. 1, error neg. Don't be biased by a few high-profile mistakes, which are natural result of varying methodologies. 2, models work. Rigorous studies for the average error rate is less than 3%. It's remained unchanged over 20 years. Sheldon 16. 2, criticism poll merit. No, the leading association of opinion researchers leading an effort despite headlines grabbing studies. So there's an average error rate. Polls was less than 3 percentage points. Accuracy has been unchanged over 20 years. Methodology make it expected that a few mistakes will occur. We urge the public to at least focus on polling. 2 and 3, 2016 fits well within averages. Silver in 18 overall polls, whereas accuracy has been historically with Trump beating polls by only 1 to 2 percentage points and states poll by 2 to 3.
Do you want to take prep, Steven? Probably. Okay, you're muted, but I'll just. I'm gonna go to the bathroom again. I'll see the prep.
Okay, I'm good now. I wish I could tell you how much time just passed. Really do, but
Do you want to just say it was another minute?
yeah, we'll take that. I'm sending out the doc. It's called conditionality. Yeah. Okay, is everybody ready for an order? Maybe not Nina, but like the doc is sent out.
It's just in the FL folder, though.
No, it is actually not there. Do you want me to?
No, it's okay. I'll just open it from the email. But like.
Okay. The order is the advantage, framing, the state's counterplan, the court's counterplan, the Japan disad, the 2020 disad. I can give that again. It was kind of quick, and there's lots of pages. So it seems like you all have it.
Could you do it one more time just to double check?
Yeah. Case, framing, states, courts, NDA, or Japan, sorry, 2020. Okay, everybody good? The death penalty is being enforced at increasing rates now, and that's bad for human dignity. The plan is corrective for reversing it. The rant at the top about historical dignity doesn't disprove our uniqueness claim, which was extended above. Group the dignity vague arguments doesn't matter because it isn't about any of the impacts we're going for, just that the death penalty in and of itself is bad, which can be thoroughly explained below. They say no federal executions. Read evidence on states which will disprove it, especially as states redact it in the future. The federal government will be able to enforce it more. Circumvention. Federal government is a prerequisite, causes other adoptions. That's a precedent for fill on. The framing page. Reject extinction first as an argument. We reduce the likelihood of any risk from escalating because every life matters. Our evidence says there's a 0.02% risk of any extinction event happening over the course of a year. It's also utilitarian logic, which makes catastrophes like Hiroshima possible. Reject their internal link chains based on conjunctive fallacy because each one has less than 100% probability. Combining them together results in something close to zero. No war. Interdependence is capable of checking. The state's counterplan. They dropped our impact into sufficiency logic based on utilitarianism. Justifies the corrupt logic we've described in the other page. Group the courts. Solve argument. National consensus won't determine whether court rules on death penalty. Williams 17. Court indicated all the national consensus no court doesn't determine whether violated the amendment to the Constitution will bear on the acceptable of the death penalty under the amendment by asking whether there's a district judgment which legislator court has a full majority in favor of the death penalty. Won't revisit the issue. 418. The Supreme Court spent decades setting its parameters with that. Kennedy will no longer be the venue for systematic capital punishment. There will be a full majority with no interest in revisiting the status quo. Capital punishment. The links to net benefit argument. Trump will take credit for it. Our argument is just about criminal justice reform writ large, which was made on the state's counterplan. If they're right that the doesn't link, then it also proves that the court counterplan doesn't link, which they've said is normal means for the entirety of the plan text. Also, the federal expansion deficit, the empirical record goes our way in the fact that it has led to more expansion of federal death penalty cases. Doesn't solve federal death penalty will be expanded. More states abolish it. Mannheimers if need the defendant subject to execution because prosecuted by the federal more states amended the federal will step in more states abandon the federal death penalty will be used to typical matters federal statute might be utilized. Counterplan will cause extensive expansion of the federal death penalty in non-death states. Mannheimers 17. One might expect inclusion the death penalty can be used from this while remaining at the federal level absence of shift capital punishment remain a fixture at the federal level. Federal jurisdiction will continue to be used expansively. Federal government doesn't empirically creates new laws to expand cases non-death penalty. Say Mannheimer 17. Part 1994 only 5 defendant prosecuted properly and federal prosecution blew wide open the federal death penalty act since 1993. Capital prosecutions have been brought against 69 defendants in non-death penalty states. Extend permutation to both. If the bills like did not benefit, it takes it out. Also shields because the states could be used as cover for Trump potentially. The court's counterplan. We still solve the affirmative. Doesn't happen slow. The inclusion of other branches means Trump's able to sign the bill on the desk, or other things are able to happen in order to get around it. Also, this definitely proves it doesn't link to the disadvantage, or because of the links to that benefit argument they made on the other page, they both link. You can't have it both ways. The Japan disadvantage. No terminal impact toward returns case arguments. Our argument isn't just that death is bad, but particularly the death penalty is bad, which means that they can't win a specific internal link to it. It's about how we get there in the first place. No impact to just increasing U.S.-Japan relations, which is the evidence that they read on the which is the evidence they read below it. There's also no link. Relations are low right now. Abe's meditation only produced a temporary Sino-Japanese attendant, but Chinese animosity is breaking fragile trust. The economy 627. The year has been losing its shine. Hong Kong has become a third of the relationship. Depends greater concern on political constraints will go ordinary field from China's epidemic. Our evidence says that COVID means that Abe is looking bad in the status quo. They've read evidence that says he's rebounding. This disproves their link argument because the ANC can recover from individual issues. But Abe is being criticized domestically and internationally for his poor handling of COVID, which means he's less likely to adopt international orders. Japan times 20. Japan's later received the public rating for the response to coronavirus. Japan's rating so long regrets that Abe government handling of the pandemic. 60% said the government was not handling the coronavirus outbreak well. There's no link to this disadvantage. They've made the argument that it's unpopular for Abe to pass it. Just the United States pushing obviously is insufficient. Their modeling arguments don't disprove. We've answered them in both contexts. Is LDP stable enough to pass a controversial policy and get away with it? Naga and Misirgo 19. Why is Japan so politically stable? Conservatives interests and reflect extent of our mutual ways and growing public opinion. The coalition twice survived tax hikes previously. Death knell. The modeling arguments are all answered above. Abe isn't key specifically because he's not important to the overall relationship. The 2020 dissent.
Can you say like no impact on the DA?
Yes, no impact. Japan won't go to war with China. There are tons of factors checking it. Abe's been in power forever. Won't be willing to lash out. 2020. No impact. Trump has been in office forever. Won't matter for the terminal impact. Another 4 years won't make any difference. No returns case arguments group them, even if it broadly makes racial disparities and dignity worse off. It's not about our internal link, which is specific to the death penalty. The Biden evidence is terrible. Doesn't say there's any political momentum to get capital punishment removed in the future. The rehighlighting of 1AC evidence is about death penalty, which means that we're an example of getting rid of those dignity issues. Trump wins. The polling argument proves there's no link. No individual voters don't care about any kind of death penalty issue. They don't have evidence that says it's willing to switch. I'll answer their link argument specifically specifically reconciliation. It's not about particular voters, just says that it could generally get some people on their side, but not enough in order to prove the broader link argument. Public support. It says that people generally care about it, but not at a sufficient issue to cause voting on. There are other things that are more important and not necessarily what Trump will win on. They say swing states. This evidence is about CJR writ large, but not contextualized to the affirmative. The fourth link is just another card about CJR, which obviously isn't sufficient. Trump won't win on it anyway. He regrets the first step act and is guaranteed to turn back on race baiting, even with fiat 1-7-1. Trump regrets supporting criminal justice. It could be the final straw on reform. Trump never won a criminal justice. Trump says privately was misguided. Trump issued tweets saying he had no ambiguities to arresting people doing looting statues. Trump won't change campaign strategy. He's incapable of hearing QO strategy and only caters to his base. Kamar 626. Trump doesn't have much of a strategy. Same critic of the voters, but incapable of hearing QO strategy. Trump ever so black voters is one of the president who is someone on the order president who's spent weeks demonizing peaceful demonstration. Trump thinks that only racism can defeat Biden. Love it. 7-2. Gauge efficacy campaign active. Trump turns on Tucker Carlson. Trump underrated Carlson as a racial politics. He's undermined his own political interests, but attending the intercom psychological. Once a person convinces themselves there's no container channel, the preferences of the silent majority of Utah to turn to here. The Black Swans argument proves that people will forget about the plan or other things will come up, healthcare, etc. All kinds of important issues and other racial protests, all of which Trump could revert on. Also means that people will forget that the first step should thump. It was a criminal justice policy, which all of their link evidence sets a threshold that being sufficient to, if he can revert from it or change his policy shift, then he could also change it from the focus of the plan.
We have 654. Okay. The order is elections, Japan, the court's counterplan, the state's counterplan, then the advantage, and then framing. I'm gonna quick run to the bathroom. Okay, is everyone good?
Wait. I lost my pen. Okay, you're good.
Okay. And everyone has the order and everything? Okay. View the dissent as a status quo counterplan that's also 100% risk of the case, which means that we only need a tiny risk of external offense in order to be able to outweigh Trump's re-election signals the death knell for the globe. He erodes alliance commitments and incites war with all great powers, including Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. All of those nuclear wars inevitably result in extinction, and no ethical axiom that you can endorse would say that that would be ethically allowed. But we also flip their probability framing on its head. We have read a card that says that Trump cements white fascist nationalism if he is able to win re-election and proves that the dignity framing that the plan propagates has no ability to be able to ease racial tensions. And even if the death penalty is bad, there's no ethical way that you can say that we should allow white nationalism to run rampant throughout the United States, but we should abolish the death penalty. There's no way that that can be considered ethical. Or political evidence indicates that Biden will get rid of the death penalty. Our evidence indicates that he supports it now, and they've made arguments to say that conservatives support getting rid of the death penalty. The president will easily get past Congress, and he will be able to sign a bill into law that gets rid of the death penalty holistically. That takes out any risk of offense that they're able to win, and there's no impact to delay from now until the time that Biden wins the election that can possibly justify causing extinction as a result of Trump. Their impact defense argument about Trump being in office now does not disprove our argument. Our Porter evidence makes it a system claim that says that Trump winning re-election sends a shock to the global system that incites tensions from all great powers, including our allies. It causes mass proliferation and signals abandonment to the global. Our evidence indicates that that's likely to cause great power war because U.S. foreign presence is the one thing that is determining the stability of the global system. The next argument is that they say it's not about their internal link and not about the death penalty. Nuclear war condemns billions of innocent people to a functional death penalty by saying that they should die as a result of someone else's actions and something that they are not guilty for, which is that it is not ethical to do it. In terms that it takes out all their framing arguments. Second is that it is about the death penalty. Our way evidence that they have read on their framing contention says that we should do things to mitigate the likelihood of armed conflict instead of focusing on vague concepts like human dignity, which is that we outweigh even under their moral frame. Trump does not win now. This was a blip in the 1 year. Our Zabriskie evidence says that polling proves that Biden is ahead now. Our Cohn evidence says that he's specifically ahead in swing states, and our Hirsch evidence indicates that Democratic unity is putting Biden ahead. But the plan flips it. I'll do the link to me here. First, is the plan is a distraction over any other issue, including coronavirus, the economy, healthcare, etc. Our Eversley evidence indicates that allows Trump to be able to spin it and create positive messaging, which gets skittish voters on his side. Our evidence indicates that he does not need to win many in order to be able to win the election. Our evidence indicates that he's specifically able to win them over with criminal justice reform in swing states, which takes out any of their arguments. Our Tanner evidence indicates the plan is a secondary swing that swings those skittish voters into Trump's line, which flips those in the swing states because those swing states are razor thin, which is that the risk of the link is big. Since Trump wins was just a blip in the 1 AR, it proves that uniqueness controls the direction of the link. You know that Biden will win now, so there's only a risk that the plan has the ability to be able to solve it. Our Zurcher evidence
indicates it results in a reconciliation strategy which creates positive messaging. Even if Trump does not maybe want to support criminal justice reform, he's a quite tacit politician, which means that he will view it as an opportunity to spin positive messaging and to distract people from the coronavirus too. As our DPIC evidence indicates the death penalty approval ratings are going down now, which is that it's broadly popular to get rid of it, and Trump will take credit for it. Our the next piece of evidence indicates that swing states are uniquely likely to support criminal justice reform, including Michigan, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. And the next argument is that solemn evidence that says that Trump will be viewed as a reformer and he wants to be able to take credit for it, even if he does not think it's good. He's faced with a litany of different issues now that are hurting him in the polls, which means that he will take any opportunity, such as the plan to capitalize on it and be able to win over those swing voters. Second is our Chung evidence indicates that the plan is that accomplishment that allows him to be able to do it, and that allows him to be able to do it, which takes out any risk of their link defense arguments. One error was all Blippi explanation, no cards, don't give them any new 2AR argument, don't give them any new 2AR arguments to explain any of that. They say that Trump won't run on it. That was the arguments that I explained above. Because of the negative messaging that's happening now, he needs to shift messages. Racism is not key. Again, he's a tacit politician. He may be stupid, but he knows that he needs to change his strategy in order to be able to win, and his advisors will tell him to do so, so he'll be able to take credit for it. The next argument is about black swans. They didn't isolate any specifically in the 1AR, don't allow the 2AR to do brand new explanation on it. The first step back was not enough. We heard explicit evidence that says that he needs to do more in order to be able to get the swing voters to come on his side, which is they cannot possibly thumb. The Japan decide. Not going for it, we will concede that there's no link and that it does not cause a global movement towards whatever. Who cares? The court's counterplan. They read a card that says that courts are too slow in the 2AC. I don't care how bad anyone thinks that this card is. They said that it is a solvency deficit and a reason why the courts alone inevitably fail. We have all agreed that the plan results in the court doing a ruling, which is that they do not solve in time, and the delay deficit applies equally as much to the affirmative. The state's counterplan can see the permit just a test of competition. I will concede that Trump will be able to take credit for it, which is that they cannot get on the other side of this double line, and he will take credit for anything that gives them the possibility of being able to win. And the plan is the thing that does it. Now the advantage, the dignity framing argument that they have made is absolutely and hopelessly vague and proves that they do not have the ability to be able to solve conservative justice. Is the conservative Senate, and Trump will obviously not impose or create any sort of moral human dignity frame that is necessary for them to be able to solve any of the case. If they are only talking about the death penalty, then it proves that they don't solve any of the ethics arguments that they are making. How can any ethical system that you're propagating say that life without parole should exist, or saying that other forms of harsh sentencing should exist? If you're thinking that the neg did not read a card on this and therefore we do not get this argument, you are incorrect. We read a card in the 1C that says that it says incapacitation as a penal rationale and proves that they cannot solve. It means that even if they get rid of the death penalty, they condemn millions of people to dying in prison as opposed to dying because of lethal injection, which proves that they do not solve any of their dignity arguments. They do not solve any of the case. There's no federal executions that are happening now. Our piece of Lynch evidence indicates that federal executions have not happened since 2003, and our evidence indicates that litigation is broadly happening now, which proves that they cannot solve the case, and there's no risk of death penalty cases happening now, which also flips their probability framing because the risk of the case is absolutely improbable and is also not ethical. The framing contention, extinction outweighs risk is probability times magnitude. Our piece of bomb evidence indicates that you need to take into account future generations. Any other axiom is ethically incoherent, is tautologically because it falls in on itself. They rely on cost-benefit analysis by saying that we should evaluate the magnitude of the people dying as a result of the death penalty. How can they possibly say that the death penalty is worse than things like life without parole without making a consequential frame? Our piece of plumber evidence indicates that you cognitively underestimate the risk of extinction events because it's so far out of the mind of human beings and it's something that we have no experience with, which means that we cognitively underestimate the risk of it. The dissad makes the risk of it significantly larger. Their no war argument that they made in the 1AR was hopelessly vague, and their 0.2% card has no warrants highlighted. The conjunctive fallacy is broadly wrong, and they need to answer the specifics of our dissent, which has a massive and high risk.
Okay, what did we have after the 1 hour? We said like 8 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. 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 Case. Framing. Court's counterplan. 2020 DA. Good. The death penalty, state sanctioned murder that must be rejected in every instance. Capital punishment creates both psychological torture as inmates wait for their death in confinement, often for decades, and physical torture in the extremely painful act of being killed. It is levied disproportionately against Black Americans, breaks apart communities, and not only is unjustifiable for anyone, but its existence makes it unavoidable that innocent people will die. Your decision calculus must forefront probable, ongoing, and knowable impacts, and infinite deferral to existential risk preserves the status quo by continually justifying avoiding taking action with the risk of each new extinction scenario. This debilitating logic makes a prioritization of human dignity impossible. They've also conceded that utilitarian impact calculus justifies atrocities like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which means you should reject it on face. Human dignity instead is a maxim by which we should orient our decision calculus. No decision maker who values human dignity could justify capital punishment. Dignity is necessary to sustain the ethical, essential meaning of what it is to be a human. Without this recognition as an a priori condition, tyranny, war, and ecological collapse are unavoidable, which is conceded and turns their arguments. Two arguments to make the risk of the DA extremely tiny before we even get there. One, conjunctive fallacy. The risk of each argument in the chain of the dissent multiplied together makes the collective risk of their terminal argument nearly zero. It proves the silliness of always prioritizing existential risk because the chance that there even is a risk to the plan that is existential is so little. Two, a selection bias that outweighs the risk of scope neglect. All extinction risks together, less than 0.2% per year. Psychological studies have shown that our fear of existential risk pushes us to prioritize and fear those risks more than we reasonably should. Their first argument is that dignity is vague. Dignity is both a standard that the court would use in framing their decision for the 1AC's ruling, but also our framing arguments are obviously not all about the plan. We agree that the criminal justice system is messed up in many ways, but the 1AC reorients our discussion from how we should think about and prioritize human life towards a recognition of human dignity that is a starting point for reforms in the criminal justice forum. It solves some things. It shifts the debate. We agree that we do not solve everything. That is not a reason for sanctioned murder to continue. There is not a good defensive argument here. They say that there are no federal executions now. That is wrong. There was an execution that happened like 4 days ago. They've also considered the argument that waiting to die is infinitely more torturous. So as the injunctions get held up in court and people keep waiting on death row, that is also a form of torture. Their framing arguments, one is that we need more focus on future generations. They've conceded that each life that you save now has an infinite and unknown impact on future generations, which proves how silly this argument is and proves that we turn it. They say that we rely on cost-benefit analysis. We do not critique all cost-benefit analysis, just existential risk deferral and the logic of the DA. They say we underestimate extinction. It is worse to overestimate it because of we never solve endemic risks. That was above. They say conjunctive fallacy is wrong. This is unwarranted in the 2NR, and we did a good explanation in the 1AR and 2AR. The court's counterplan, if they are right that the courts are so slow, this also implicates the DA by a massive amount, to so much that you should be skeptical as to whether the plan even happens before the 2020 election. If the normal means would be hypothetically for the court to announce in June when they usually announce big decisions, there is nothing in the 2NR that grapples with this. Even if the plan gets delayed, we still tangibly solve something, but it messes with the DA so much because it is so time sensitive. When there is no counterplan, this delay argument is not offensive for them in any tangible way, but should put in question for you whether or not this DA even happens before, or whether or not the plan even happens before the DA. The 2020 DA, one, Trump will not run on the plan. The 2NR is good at explaining why it would be bad if Trump did mention criminal justice in the run-up to the election, but never says why he will. They've conceded 3 1AR cards. The Swan evidence says that he regrets the First Step Act and says he's now going to stick with his gut instinct and instead revert to a law and order stance. The Kamar evidence says that he is incapable of crafting a strategy that reaches outside his base. He has reverted to this emphasis on law and order to cater to his support because that's what he feels comfortable with. There is no one attempting to craft a strategy that reaches out to independents. There is nothing empirically that would suggest that that is the case with Trump's strategy. They've also conceded the Lewis evidence that says that Trump's team believes in the Biden, or the way to beat Biden is by appealing to racism. So we're also all conceding all agreement that we're the court. So he would have to actively want to take credit and somehow twist the decision to take credit for the plan if he really wanted to. Second is, if they're right that he is dying to use criminal justice reform to beat the Democrats, at no point does the 2NR meaningfully distinguish between the First Step Act and his recent XO and the plan. There is no link specification to the death penalty. He has the ability to run on criminal justice reform now. The distinction between the two is asinine. If not, or if he is not running on it, it only proves that he does not want to. There no impact to the DA. 4 years of Trump in office disproves the idea that he will start a war. Obviously, he talked the talk, and there's a lot of rhetoric, but he has not actually done anything to indicate that there would be an existential risk. They've also conceded no U.S.-China war from the Japan DA. The warrant there was economic interdependence, which applies here too. Their impact calculus is ethical blackmail. Their arguments about Trump and white nationalism proof our framing arguments. Trump cementing white nationalism does not implicate our human dignity arguments. They have to win the entirety of the DA before they get these Biden solves the AF arguments, which they have a very small risk of their link argument. Do not evaluate Turn's case first. Biden doing the AF is uncertain. There is an impact to delay if we win our framing arguments, and deferring probable impacts is violent and calculative. Nuke war is not the death penalty, does not sanction murder. The Huawei evidence does not say we should not, decrease the risk of armed conflict, but that human dignity is key to that by recognizing the fundamental nature of humanity and the importance of it. They say uniqueness should control the rank. This is a bad way to logically view disadvantages. If we win that there's no risk of the link, it should be sufficient to win, because it doesn't matter if Biden is going to win now. It means that a Biden win is inevitable and functionally functions as the uniqueness of our argument. They say that Trump wants to take credit, and the plan is the accomplishment that allows him to do so. He should already be able to do so. Again, there is no argument in the 2NR that is specific to the death penalty. They say the 1AR is blippy. Fuck off. The 1AR was great. Sorry that he read too many cards for you to deal with. They say that Trump needs to shift his messaging. Maybe he should, but he won't. Everything empirically about Trump's campaign strategy proves that he's not trying to reach outside the base and will not attempt to take a liberal talking point away from the Democrats. It's stupid.
Virtual handshake.
Yeah,
Like,
good debate.
good debate.
Yeah, good debate. I guess I'll stop this recording.